Hello and welcome. I'm Robbie.
And I'm Jay.
And you're joining us for episode 13 of Generations Apart, the podcast where we chat about gaming and technology across the generations, sharing our perspectives on the past and our excitement for the future. On today's episode, we're doing the age-old debate of Apple versus Android. Before that, though, Jay, what's piqued your interest this week?
How very kind of you to ask. Well, I have brought you something that I think you're going to like. Now, I will say this is going to be much easier to grasp for those watching us on YouTube. So if you aren't on YouTube and you're on podcasts, I will do my best to explain this, but it's going to be much more visually impressive to either go and watch this or look at the links we'll share in the show notes. So, Robbie, I've shared with you a video. It's from a company called Wonder Dynamics.
Okay.
And it's for a new product that's in beta at the moment called Wonder Studios. And what this tool promises to do is to allow any filmmaker, any videographer to capture a scene and then use AI to replace the human actor with any number of by the looks of it, sort of predetermined CGI characters. But I imagine moving forward, you'd be able to load your own. So if you have a look at the video that I've shared, you'll see that what they do is they in any, as you would in any other kind of cinema style, with your cinematography, you shoot your film, you shoot your actor performing in whatever environment you want them to perform in. And what this software does, using AI, of course, is it will digitally remove the character that you have that you've filmed. But what it does is it maps their performance, both physically, facially, and then it also looks to recreate the lighting conditions and then swap in your CGI character. So in the video demonstration, you see predominantly robots and aliens being subbed in for humans. And I think it's particularly impressive with the robots because what you will notice is that the robot's frame is considerably smaller than the human frame, which means they're not just kind of mapping over the character and blocking them out. In some respects, they're having to make up the background in order to allow for these much slimmer, slender robot joints to take the place of the humans. Looks incredible. I've seen some early test footage from some studios that are playing with it. Obviously, they've got that early access. I did attempt to sign up for it, but I don't think they're really interested in our sector, to be honest. In terms of customer sign up, they ask you what kind of things you do with videography and CGI and animation, and of course I can say I do none of those things. So I didn't bother trying to sign up for it, but it looks incredible. It suggests that it's all browser based, which if it is amazing. Probably going to work best as a full fat app, I would imagine, installed on your hardware. But I just thought it was incredible. We've talked a lot about AI and image generation, and this is not trying to create videos from the ground up. This is not trying to completely, using some sort of a digital prompt, using Gen AI, produce a video from scratch. Instead, it's using that technology to read the movements of the character, map their movements, map their face, and then remove them from the scene altogether.
That was insane. That looked
just
incredible. That looked absolutely ridiculous. I had no idea that that's what it was going to be, but that looked absolutely incredible. God, yeah. Imagine the amateur videographers who are now going to be able to do amazing animations just mapped on top of their videos automatically. Oh, I mean, incredible.
It's exactly that. Like it just, okay. From what I've seen from people who've got early access, it's not quite as polished as what they've shown there. It's a little easier to tell where the video has sort of ghosted the character out in the background. And I guess that's going to probably be down to the quality of the video source in the first place, the clarity of the image, how it's been shot, and probably, obviously, they're going to show off their best footage, probably heavily manipulated for their promo video. The people I found it through, as I often do when it comes to this sort of weird movie-related cutting-edge tech, is a YouTube channel that I highly recommend to you called Corridor Crew.
Yeah.
Corridor Crew. There's a guy on Twitter I follow from Corridor Crew called Ren, and he was the one that was showing his early attempts to replace him in a video with the alien. It was pretty good, I have to say, even as a sort of a slightly rougher version of what you've just seen. it was incredible. But I just thought that when I saw it, it fit the bill. I was like, I need
insane.
piqued my interest for this week, and that absolutely piqued my interest, and I thought you'd like it. So
Yeah, I'm not surprised. That was awesome. That was definitely a good one to raise, and highly recommend checking it out on YouTube to see that video. Or we'll include the links in the show notes as well, so you can check it out yourself. But definitely check that one out because that was awesome. Way better than I was expecting. I saw there was a.
I'm not sure how to take
no
that.
Offense,
Robbie,
no offense, Jay. The thing I thought that was really cool as well. It's not just replacing, as you say, it's kind of filling in some of the gaps as well. If the character that it's replacing is smaller, but also there was an option that it showed on the video there where you could just completely remove someone from the video and just fill in the background as well, which I thought looked incredible. Again, I mean, they might have polished it a bit for the video, but even then,
well, that's it. And you can see in the future with a tool like that where, okay, so it looks like in the box you get a handful of CGI characters that you can kind of replace your character with. That library presumably will grow over time, and I imagine if you've got the skills to design a 3D character and rig them accordingly, you'd be able to bring your own characters into that in the future as well. Yeah. And I like the fact that it didn't just slap them on top and even track the body movements, which is impressive enough. It was the remapping of the lighting conditions to replicate that of the video. That blew my mind. Because that means that the AI is not only tracking the body, tracking the face, creating the sort of skeleton, the rig that animation's got to follow, removing that character from the background, but it's also analysing the lighting in order to replicate that on the character in sort of 3D on what is effectively a 2D plane as far as the video is concerned. That blew my mind. So.
And it looked editable as well. So if the lighting's slightly off, you can move it around. But also, I saw he was moving the leg of one of the characters around, so it wasn't exactly aligned with the person that was filmed, but slightly different. And you could just move like legs and arms around if you really want to. Which, incredible. So it's not just a one and done generation. It's you can really tweak it to get it perfected.
Well, I added, I started following the studio. So Wonder Dynamics is the company behind it, and the product's Wonder Studio. And I started following Wonder Dynamics on Twitter, and of course they're kind of they're retweeting people who are using the tool in beta. And I did see someone who'd taken some footage of surfers, and subbed the surfer out for there's a chunky looking character in their suite in that video demo, and they'd put this character onto the surfboard. And I have to say, it wasn't perfect. It was very obviously something could be manipulated over it. The footage was grainy. The character in the actual footage was quite far away and slightly soft focus, whereas the 3D animation over the top was very crisp. So it stood out a little bit, but it did an incredible job of mapping the surfer, with the one exception being when the surfer kind of twisted his board towards the camera, blocking slightly the view of the leg ended up kind of passing through the board, and then it would sort of pivot back to the point where you'd be able to see the full body and it would look fine again, and then the surfer would quickly flick the board back again to the point where you shouldn't be able to see perhaps a foot and half a shin, but the footage would still show that clipping through. But again, as a starter for 10 to get you moving, I'm sure that's way faster than it's ever been to insert that kind of character over the top of an actor. So even if you have to go in and do some work to modify it, mask things out in post, I imagine that, again, AI, as it's been pitched in many forms now, is shortcutting the process. It's doing, say, 80% of the legwork and then leaving you with 20% rather than trying to replace absolutely everything that you do. So
incredible.
Another fascinating use for AI.
Absolutely. What
about you, Robbie? What's piqued your interest this week?
Well, sticking with the AI trend, of course. So if you've listened to the show before, we chat about AI quite a lot, and it's just because it's such a fast-moving space. But there's a new AI model that's taken a bit of an interest by GitHub. It's been trending for a while now, and it's one called Auto GPT. And this one, slightly different to some of the other models, in that it gives itself feedback. So you give it's more like an individual bot that can give itself feedback and improve over time. But the way it works is you give it a simple task that's not like an immediate response. So it's not like, generate me some text. It's more like the example that was given in the video I watched, which was a tech-linked video, is that in this specific online game, they gave the bot a task to arrange a Valentine's Day party. And what this bot did is it created agents that would come to this party, sent them invites, arranged a date and time for this party, and then actually hosted the party. And that was all from that simple command of, host a Valentine's Day celebration. You'll have to read more into it. I need to read more into it because it's just so interesting. But apparently even Microsoft have taken an interest in this and are developing their own on top of this model called Jarvis, which I thought you might like as well. It's one of their autonomous bots. But yeah,
it didn't work out so well last time they adopted pop culture for the naming conventions, did it?
Cortana, yeah.
Daughter died a death.
Yeah.
But oh well.
Jarvis
it is then.
I guess could be replaced by Jarvis now. But yeah, I just thought it was an interesting take on the GPT stuff and the AI models generally, in that it's not trained on a huge data model set. It's given a task and it gives itself feedback and gets better over time, and it just carries out more complex tasks. But yeah, I need to read more into it because it seems really interesting, and it's kind of new. It's open source, which is why Microsoft have been able to build stuff on top of it, and why it's been trending on GitHub. But yeah, I'll include the links in the notes. Definitely one to watch. But I just thought, how cool was that? This kind of self-perpetuating AI model.
It's
also
worrying,
terrifying.
Isn't it? I don't like the fact that Microsoft have named theirs Jarvis, because that then leads me back to the Marvel story, The Age of Ultron.
Yeah.
Which ultimately was an AI going rogue, embodying itself in multiple robots and trying to take out humanity. So,
yep.
And Jarvis was a key player in that, if you remember Jarvis.
I do.
For those MCU fans out there, went on to become the Vision. And anyway, but do you know what we need, Robbie? As well as our sort of piqued your interest segment, which we try and do every episode, we probably need a Gen AI watch at this point, because it feels like that's all we talk about.
I feel like we do.
And even since we did our revisiting generative AI on episode 12, in the 1 week since we recorded that, a few days since it's launched right now as we're recording, but the 1 week since recording, we've had big movement again. And I feel we'd be remiss not to quickly cover it. So, we touched on in our episode last time out the open letter that Elon Musk had co-signed with a number of tech names in tech, basically warning of the dangers of the speed at which we were running at this AI, and asking developers to at least take a 6-month hiatus.
Yeah.
And then this week, it's leaked that he's formed a company called xAI, and he's now coined it as Truth GPT. I saw he's been questioned about it today, and he's come out and admitted that he is looking to develop his own AI bot, own AI technology called Truth GPT, which apparently he wants to challenge to understand the meaning of the universe. And he wants this GPT to learn and to discover the meaning of the universe. So that's,
big goals.
That was one of the big developments. And I also haven't read about this in detail, so maybe we'll cover it in a future episode. But Google announced another AI product, AI-powered search this time, which I think they called Magi. Magi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So, yeah, and there's probably other stuff that I've forgotten as well, but those are the first two things that jump back into my mind in just a week.
I didn't realize Elon's was called Truth AI. The irony that
Truth GPT,
sorry. The irony that he owns Twitter now, and the whole, Trump did his own social because he got kicked off Twitter, and that was called Truth Social.
Yeah.
The irony.
Well, interestingly, I didn't read the full article because I was reading it just before we started to record. There's also a suggestion that he might be looking to sue OpenAI. So there might be a lawsuit in the offing as well.
Well,
it's going to escalate.
He always said commercializing the development of ChatGPT and other AI products was not what OpenAI was for. So I can imagine he's a bit miffed that where his investment actually went, which was kind of funding the development of Microsoft or whoever's using ChatGPT to commercialize it. So, yeah.
There you go. So a continually evolving spot. Even in a week, it's moved another mile.
Jeez.
Crazy.
So today, the topic of today, we're chatting about Android versus Apple versus Android. It's the age-old debate. But today, we're going to be specifically, at least to start with, focusing on mobile technology. So smartphones and tablets and the operating systems, and in Apple's case, the hardware that's developed for these devices. The pros and cons of both, with being super respectful of both parties. And just to clarify where I'm coming from, so I'm a serial flip-flopper. I go back between the two So every couple of years when my contract's up, my phone contract, I tend to switch to the other side. So I've just recently actually moved back to Apple, but I can definitely advocate for the benefits of Android devices. And so I suppose today, knowing you're firmly in the Apple camp, Jay, I'll be taking that side of things to chat
an
about.
unquestioned allegiance from my side, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And I will say though, to just to your point earlier about being super respectful here, this is not us trying to stoke the flames of fanboys. I absolutely respect the pros that you're going to outline of the Android platform. I've made my choice. I'm very happy with my choice. I'm not one of those, like much with the consoles, that goes around trying to bash other people's decisions. This has been an issue for as long as I can remember now from a working point of view. This goes back to my service desk days, when it was you were either one or the other, and you used to debate why you'd chosen the one you'd chosen. I always steer clear of those arguments. I didn't really care. In my mind, I've chosen the best one for me.
Yeah.
So I don't really care. I'm interested in this discussion because I'm kind of hoping you're going to open my eyes to a world that I haven't dabbled with. I don't think for a minute you're going to persuade me at the end of this to go, I should go and try Android. I'm happy in the ecosystem I've spent a lot of time and money on, but I am interested to know what the differences are, and maybe what I'm missing out on. So looking forward to finding out a little bit more about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the preface, really, is that it's an individual choice. And all we'll be highlighting today is the benefits for a specific type of person more than anything. And that's, why I'm a bit of a serial flip-flopper, because I change over time and what my preferences are with my technology and ecosystem. So I can definitely chat to why I've moved back and forth over time as well. But before we get into I was going to kick it off with some hardware and software points. But before we get into that, I did want to ask if you had any experience with any Android devices before, Jay, before we start the debate, just so I know if you've had some good experience in the past or bad experiences or any experiences at all.
No. So I've been iPhone since the very first iPhone. I made a very lucky choice in the UK. About 3 or 4 months before the iPhone was announced in terms of its UK release. So we knew it was coming, but in terms of the details of its UK release, I had just moved from the mobile provider Orange back in the day to O2. And when the iPhone first launched, it's a long time ago, so many people might not remember it. You may not have even been old enough to have been buying an iPhone at that point. Robbie, I don't know. The iPhone was a network exclusive to O2 for a certain period of time. And I just moved to O2, and I ended up having the iPhone for my birthday a couple of months after it was released. So I had the first generation iPhone. I've been on it ever since. And to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Android came second in terms of the smartphone. So I don't think they were around before iPhone. Pretty confident that's the case, because I know the iPhone changed the landscape, didn't it? Before that, it was Nokia, Sony Ericsson, were the two big players. We had Motorola. Thinking about all the mobile providers that predate smartphones. Pretty sure Android came after iPhone, but do please fact check that.
Yeah, you'd be right. Quiz for you then. Do you know when the iPhone was first released?
Do I know when it was first released?
Yeah.
I think it was 2007.
Yeah, absolutely right. Android was released almost a couple of months after, but a year later, 2008. In September. iPhone was June.
Because if you remember, we went from the iPhone 1, or just the iPhone, to the iPhone 3G, which was weird because then we didn't have a 2, which I know 3G was the data, not the model number, but it was weird to go from iPhone 1. Oops, that's Siri having a chat to me. iPhone 1 to iPhone 3G, and then it was 3GS.
Yeah.
And then it was 4, and then 4S, and then on and on ever since. But so I've always been iPhone. I didn't buy into them because I was an Apple fanboy. Far from it. I owned an iPod, second or third generation iPod, but I wasn't really into my music in a big way. So it was more of a kind of a tech purchase. It was very expensive. I liked it. I enjoyed the form factor, but it was far from like a fanboy thing. I'd never owned a Mac. But I got into the iPhone. This was pre-app stores. It was very basic, the iPhone, in terms of what it did at the time. I had the second iPad, which would have come 2011, I think. 2010 was the first iPad. 2011
Wow.
was the second generation iPad, which is the one I bought. And I bought at a similar time. I think I've told the story before, so I won't labour on it. But I bought my iMac, which was my first Apple device, all in a similar period. I think it was iPhone, followed by iMac, closely with the iPad too, I think. So I've always been Apple. I've obviously used the Android devices. I've held them, I've handled them, but I've never done more than play with it. Or go, oh, this is pretty. Thanks for showing me your phone, and giving it back to the owner. Like I've never actually lived with one day to day.
Okay.
So I don't have that kind of hands-on experience.
So a lot to chat about today then, because I've got experience of both. I started on Android. I always at the time, my first the phone that I guess I bought myself was the Samsung Galaxy S3 back in the day, which would have been around 2012. But I always thought that iPhones were a bit unattainable, a bit too expensive. Like I couldn't really afford them. They were very expensive, if I remember back then as well.
Well, they still are, arguably.
Well, yes,
I think that's part of the problem. Is I'm sure we'll come on to it, but they very much pitch themselves as the premium product.
Yes, yeah.
They've had a few missteps along the way in the last few years in terms of trying to open up devices to sort of the lower price market. But they do very much position themselves as a premium product worth paying for.
Yeah.
And that, like you said, especially in the early years, made them very hard to obtain. I think I paid it was a good £280, maybe £280 up front for my iPhone, as well as the exorbitant massive contract which baked in part of the hardware for a 2-year period. So, they weren't given away free on contracts, that had that cost baked in like they are now. Even just to buy one at that time, you had to pay a significant amount of money down to get the device. And we're going back, as we said, 15, 16 years now?
Yeah.
Right. So, they've always been harder to obtain.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting watching that over time and seeing what's happened with the likes of Samsung, who have now tried to frame themselves as that premium brand, but on the Android side. So we'll be getting into it in a bit, where they have their own ecosystem. They're roughly the same price now as iPhones, with the same kind of flagship features that you might expect from, a $1,000 plus phone, £1,000 plus phone. But I mean, that's one of the other things, and we'll get onto that as we chat more into the hardware and software, is that you don't have to just buy Samsung when it comes to Android devices. There's a multitude out there. Cool. Well, good to know your experience. And when we're...
Or lack of.
Or lack thereof. Well, you've got all the experience with Apple, which potentially, I don't have that much experience with Apple. As I say, I flip-flopped. But yeah, you were Apple through and through, so you can definitely have that side of the argument. So in terms of hardware, I think one of the I want to talk just briefly on some of the benefits of Android. And I know we just mentioned it there as well, but it's the multitude of options that you get with Android devices. So Android, and it's a bit of a weird one putting them against each other, Apple and Android, because Apple is a manufacturer and software developer, so they make the hardware and the software for their devices, whereas Android is just an open source software that can be used on any device, which the benefit, I guess, is that there is tons and tons of different devices that you can get, ranging from all different types of budgets and use cases, using Android as their base operating system. Whereas Apple, you have to get a Apple manufactured phone that comes with the software. So if it's purely the software that you're looking for, and you really want iOS, you have to buy an Apple product. Whereas if it's Android that you really like, there's an awful lot of manufacturers that you can choose from to get that hardware. So that's one of the main things that is, I guess, the distinguishing difference between the two, at least the one that I've noticed, is just the greater amount of choice on the Android side to the Apple side.
True. And depending on your viewpoint, I guess that could be considered a pro or a con. I think it makes it harder to make the right decision, or to know you've made the right decision, because I think it kind of splits the audience. So I think if you want, like you say, if you want iOS and you want iPhone, they've muddied the waters a little over the years with now they've got the iPhone, and then there's the Pro, and then there's the Pro Max, and then there was the S, which was effectively like the mini. There've been all these different flavors, but ultimately you go into an Apple store, you're buying an Apple device, you buy the phone that meets your budget, and you get iOS.
Yeah.
Whereas I would find it harder And I do find it harder, and I guess to some degree intimidating, which is why I probably don't bother with it anymore, to try now and unpick the differences between the different phones and know I'm making the right choice, because I don't have to just go and ask Samsung which their best device is, which one fits my budget. I might also want a Google Pixel.
Yeah.
And I guess this is where as well the whole Google is Android, Android is Google, what's what here? And we talked about this briefly before we started. Where does the Google Pixel fall? So the Google Pixel is hardware from the same provider as the software, but they're not trying to align them, are they? It's still Android, I assume, on the Google Pixel.
That's right, yeah. And it's one of the benefits of going with Pixel or Google as manufacturers, is because they obviously make the software, and you get the same benefits that you do with Apple, in that the software is optimized for their hardware. So it's obviously going to work best on their manufactured phones. So the Google phones tend to run really well with stock Android, is what they call it, stock Android. And if you listen to any kind of reviewers online, stock Android tends to be the one that is preferred by most people. It's because a lot of the other manufacturers, say Samsung or Asus or whoever's doing Android phones, it comes with a lot of bloatware that you might get, or you might have, familiar experiences with on PCs, where you've got a bunch of software that you didn't want to install.
Yeah, you just want vanilla Windows, but you end up with HP's sidebar or whatever it is.
Yeah, exactly.
You end up stripping it all out. I mean, the amount of times in my youth I would take a brand new laptop from someone and just wipe it and put vanilla OS on it just to remove all that crap.
So stock Android is that vanilla OS,
right.
And a lot of people really prefer it, to the point where and this comes to almost the flexibility point that I was going to chat about in a sec, is you can get different launchers, what's called launchers on Android. So you can have an OS but a completely different skin on top of it, and you can get launchers that are specifically designed to be basically stock Android, so it strips everything and you only see the bare bones apps. So you can get these launchers, and on pretty much any Android phone you can add them on there. But I get the point about that. It is a bit of a minefield choosing Android phones, because there's so many different options. And yeah, I mean, it can be quite daunting and quite easy to make the wrong decision as well. Something that's not going to have perhaps the longevity or the support over time is a big thing, I think, in the Android space. So it's typically why when I flip-flopped going from Apple to an Android device, it was almost always Samsung. And that was because Samsung, out of all the other Android manufacturers, had very good support for their devices over a long-term period of time. A good support in terms of if you needed to get it fixed, there's somewhere you can go that has parts, like pretty much guaranteed parts to fix it. There's tech support available, but also the software updates over time. You're guaranteed a certain number of years after you've purchased the device that you'll have software updates, so that it'll still be running in, say, 2 to 3 years. So yeah, that's why I typically go Samsung. But if you went a different manufacturer, and there are far cheaper devices that you can get, I often saw them as more disposable. They wouldn't last very long, just because the software they would force an update, say, on that device, and it would make that device, like, it wouldn't be able to run anymore.
And that's interesting, because some of those benefits you've just been shouting out, which is why you pay the premium, I guess, for the Samsung ecosystem, are direct copies of what made Apple, and I guess what made Apple as unique as it was, but also why Apple charges what it does.
Yeah.
And I remember years ago being, and this has happened a few times with different Apple devices over the years. I've had very few problems with them, but when they do have a problem, Apple's approach to customer service and how they look after you has blown me away. There hasn't been a time where I've had to stump up any cash to fix any problem with a number of different devices, whether it was a phone, a laptop, whatever. When they've gone wrong, they've recognised that was their fault and they've fixed it.
Yeah,
they've not gone, wear and tear, it's the age of the device. I mean, I had it on my MacBook. It was an older MacBook, and the batteries had started to bloat. And I don't know whether it had been in a dock too long, or the batteries started to fail. And you could see there was ever so slight bend in the aluminium case. And I took it in. They went, that's not right. This was a 4 or 5 year old laptop at that point.
Yeah,
they took it in, they fixed it. It was like £800 worth of repairs, or something ridiculous. Didn't charge me a penny, and I got it back with brand new batteries. And because, as you say, their devices, I know we're talking about a MacBook here, but it's the same with the phones. They will run for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Aside from the battery, which often tends to be the problem. By putting a new battery in this MacBook, it was as good as new. And I ended up selling it. It was the MacBook. It was just before I moved away from the Apple ecosystem, and it was actually the fact they'd replaced the batteries made it worth more. And I sold it. I thought I'll take the opportunity while I can.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those premium services you mentioned, and that support, I guess, is what you buy into in the Apple ecosystem. So it's interesting to hear that Android, or an Android spin-off, has become that service.
And I think
to
that's
the Android market.
When we talk about Samsung developing over time, I think that's the main thing that they've attempted to do, is become the Apple of Android, with both the customer and software support over time, but also that premium label that you might associate with a smartphone, but just on Android instead. So they've definitely tried to emulate that, because they weren't always like that. They were always a bit, I think historically, that I don't even think they had their own stores. Now there are Samsung stores similar to the Apple stores and things like that, where you can actually go in and speak to someone about the issues you're having with device, or a sales rep or something like that, which they're definitely not stealing ideas, but they've taken influence from Apple's way of selling.
They all do it. Like any Apple fan who tries to shout the virtues of what Apple do is often talking about features that the other phones had years or versions before. The controversial statement that some will disagree with is that often Apple tend to implement those things better.
Yeah,
but they tend to do it later. So they, they don't tend to come, like Notification Center is one, and I'm not going to fight on who's got the best notification center, but that was a feature I remember being on Android for a good year or more before it made its way to iOS.
Widgets as well, widgets on the home screen.
Yeah, exactly, and there's loads of examples of that. So I don't think it's not a surprise to see the opposition looking back over the fence and going, all right, well, you've had a bit of that, we'll have a bit of your thing that we like and that makes you unique. And that, I think what's interesting, I guess as a positive for Android is, and we touched on this in the Tech Gimmicks episode we did a few weeks ago, is the variety of hardware, not just in terms of manufacturer, because a lot of phones do look the same. They've got maybe slightly different processors, or a better, more memory, or a slightly better touchscreen, or there's a better camera. But they all look very much the same. It's now the variety we're seeing in the devices as well. So Samsung have got the Flip something.
Yeah,
flip,
the Fold and the Flip. They've got two.
The Fold and the Flip.
So, it's the same with Motorola. All the folding phones at the moment are on Android, from Android manufacturers.
Which is interesting, because that's the first time probably in the iPhone's life where there's been anything that's made me go, ooh, what's that cool thing you've got over there? Not enough to make me want to go and change, but I'll be honest and say, if Apple released a flip phone tomorrow, I'd probably be thinking about ordering one.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, because that's the first time I think that people have tried to meaningfully deviate from what had become a very boring. And I'll say the same for iPhone. I'm at the point now where I've upgraded phone 6 or 7 times over the life cycle of the iPhones, and the excitement lasts for less and less time every time I do it, because they've made it so seamless as well. Once you've updated it and you've transferred all your apps over and all your data, and everything's just moved over seamlessly, it doesn't. You pick the phone up and you go, oh, it feels slightly different in my hand, but everything else feels exactly how it was when I put down the old one. And that's
exactly the reason that I flip flop, because I want a proper change in my phone at the time. Is I don't want to just upgrade to the latest. Say if I was on iPhone, which I was on when I switched over, I was on the XS Max, which was what I was on before I went to Samsung before, and I moved to the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra, very long name. Was that I wanted something completely different, and if I upgraded to a new iPhone, there wasn't much of a difference that I saw. And so I definitely feel what you're saying in terms of the excitement wouldn't last. And that's what I looked for in the change, and why I flip-flop typically year to year, is that the grass is always greener when you're looking at the other ecosystem, the other operating system. And that's why I typically flip-flop.
And I know that over the years, I think it's more Android than Apple, but I know Android have kind of attempted to make that transition easier, haven't they? Don't they have a kind of a move from Apple process or system by which you can more easily migrate your Apple accounts?
Apple's got the same on the Google Store. They've got a move to iOS app as well to help you move.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah,
They
both got apps to help with that.
Help you move from the other. Interesting.
Yeah. In fact, I think Apple did it first because I remember moving to the iPhone XS Max from my Samsung Galaxy S7 Edge, which would have been, God, what would that have been? Ooh, like 2015, something like that. And there was an app then to move from my Samsung Galaxy S to
I have a question
S7.
for you then, because this has been the one thing that's always, I won't say always put me off because I don't have any desire to move, but has certainly made me think, oh, couldn't we do with that? I'm assuming that process, that app, doesn't do anything for the apps that you have purchased through the app stores and your data within them outside of the core phone's features, or does it? Like, does that in any way? Because over the years, I don't know how much I've spent on apps in the App Store. It's not so bad these days, but there was certainly a time when I was, I remember paying £60 or £70, I think it was, for TomTom when they brought the sat-nav app to the phone before it all became baked into the Maps app. But, do those apps help you in migrating your purchases from the stores? Because it's those stores that often bind you to those ecosystems because you've invested, on top of your hardware, you've invested money in the software that you're now running on that phone.
Yeah. No, they are locked to their individual stores, which is funny you mention that because every time, and I've probably moved ecosystems from Android to iPhone and other way around, maybe 4 or 5 times. Every time I do it, I'm surprised to see how many apps that I'd purchased and completely forgot about. So I'm probably outside the norm in that I've purchased probably the same apps on both stores, and I always surprise myself when I go over to the other side and realize, I've already got these apps that I've purchased. Some of them are out of support by the time I actually go back, but some of them I'm surprised have developed even further, and I've bought an app that was perhaps cheap back in the day, which is now a really robust, fantastic app or game, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, that's certainly a nicer way to experience it, isn't it? Rather than finding out. I mean, I'll be honest.
I paid the money twice, so it's still a loss either way.
Oh yeah, I've got the apps in folders and often find they're redundant by the time I go back to them several years later, or they haven't been updated in God knows how long. It always cracks me when you open up apps on Apple that still have the old look and feel, where they used to try and make everything look 3D and like its real world counterpart. The old keyboard would come up.
Yeah. But it's more contacts and like images. And other settings and things like that would be moved over. Say like it would recognize a Google account, so it would log you in all your Google apps if you moved over to Android or iOS, and things like that. I can't remember exactly what it did, but it did make the process a lot easier than just having to go it yourself.
So I've got a couple of things. I've got a controversial statement for you,
Bring
which I'd like you to counter. But also, before I talk about that, I'll save that tease. I want to talk about the ecosystems because I think that is a big part of this. We've touched on the ecosystems in terms of the app stores and things like that, and getting into the software. But what I'm really talking about then is the additional hardware or the other devices that these companies encourage you to buy, which keep you in that space. As you mentioned, I am a big Apple fanboy. This is not some sort of a flex. I have an iPhone. I have an iPad. I have an Apple Watch. I have a MacBook. I have multiple Apple TVs around the house. We don't have Sky or any kind of cable services. We just have Apple TVs. That was our decision. It's easy for the kids. One remote, one interface, everything's the same. And of course, they're interoperable with all our devices. The family are all using Apple devices. My wife has an iPhone and a tablet. My kids have got tablets. And because of all of that is in one ecosystem, I'm able to control them all in sort of family management ways and pay centrally for all their apps, control their screen time. I know all this stuff exists on other devices, but my point is that it's harder and harder the more you invest to consider peeling away from that. I recently had the opportunity to go to California for a big 40th birthday trip, and I made the pilgrimage to Apple Central, to their headquarters, the big new amazing campus they've built. Couldn't go in, but I went to the visitor center and I stood in the little Apple store. I bought my Apple t-shirt and I looked around and thought, I can't not buy some tech from Apple Mecca. And I looked around and my problem was I owned everything. And not the latest version, I should add. That was a real flex. Not the latest versions, but I'd got one of each of the core devices. And so what I ended up buying was a HomePod Mini. And the reason I wanted to just touch on that is that we are an Alexa house when it comes to smart speakers, and that's not going to change because I'm not going to replace them all. It would take too long, cost too much money. But I was really interested in how the HomePod Mini integrates itself into all your other Apple devices without you asking. So when you're playing music on the HomePod Mini, on any Apple device that goes near it, so your phone, your watch, it will give you the play controls, and you can start to control the music.
That's weird.
Yeah, without actually having to do anything. It's just the fact that you're in its proximity. And it wasn't just linked to me, but my wife came near the HomePod Mini and she went, "Oh, why am I seeing your music?" And I was like, because it's recognised that your device is near to it and it thinks you might want to control it. So like that ecosystem that it pulls you into, the way that all these devices operate together does make that proposition, once you're in it, the idea of leaving it, a really difficult one to kind of come to terms with, because you're not just losing the functionality of your phone or changing the functionality of your phone. You're potentially having a significant knock-on impact with your workflow and your other products, depending on how integrated you are into them and how much you use them. So I wanted to throw that out. And I know it's not quite the same with Android because they don't have the same spectrum of products. As you said, it's Android, not Google, and that makes Chromecast or Chromebooks and stuff a little bit different. But like, how have you found that? Because you I know you're slowly being sucked into the Apple world a little bit at the moment, probably by virtue of constantly talking to me about it. But when you flip flop, has that become more of a thing for you over the years that tech has developed in these other devices, or have you not really noticed that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think, when was it? So when I had the Samsung S7 Edge back in, I think that was 2015. I could be getting the date wrong. I got my first smartwatch. I had the Samsung, I think it was the Gear S3 or something at the time. It was quite a chunky, rugged, frontier style watch. And so when I flip flop anyway, it's always, I need to get the phone and then I need to get the watch. It's always like one and the other, because you are not just switching to the other phone. Because I tried that for a while with when I moved back to Samsung for the Note 20 Ultra, I also got the watch then as well. So I had the Samsung watch to go with it. And then I bought the iPhone recently, and I tried to stick with the Samsung watch for maybe a month before getting an Apple Watch. And it just doesn't work very well at all on iOS. And not for lack of trying, you can see from the Samsung side, because there is an app in iOS for the Samsung Watch, so it does support it technically. But I'd say at about 20% of the functionality that you would get on an actual Samsung device or even any other Android device. And what you've raised there, and I can't tell whether that's like you brought it up as a good thing, because all I'm hearing is like a completely locked ecosystem where you have limited options and limited interoperability. That's a hard word to say. Between the Apple devices you have and any other device that you might want. So say you wanted a completely different smartwatch. Say you did want to get a Samsung watch because maybe the technology was better, or you like the interface better or something. You don't have that as an option when you're in Apple. So it's a complete locked ecosystem. The only options you have, it does limit what you have available, which means that whether it's good or bad, and there are cases where technically the technology is objectively worse than some of the competition that are in different ecosystems, you don't have them as an option. You can only get the potentially worse, but it works with your ecosystem. So that there's pros and cons, I think, of the ecosystem in that they work seamlessly between the two. As you say, without even asking, it's connecting your HomePod Mini to your other devices. And it's the same with the Apple TV. You can connect your phone with the Apple TV, and your watch and your iPad, and everything works together really well. But you do have limited options if you did want to stray even slightly away from there, which is one of the things that I still find hard to get over with Apple, is because they're definitely doing that on purpose. It's definitely a way to keep people in the ecosystem and lock them in.
So I completely agree, and I'm not going to attempt kind of a comeback or a defence, because I don't think you're trying to box me into a corner there. I'll tell you what my thoughts are, and they're evolving as I'm hearing you. I think this perhaps plays to our work or our preferences in terms of what we do for a job. So not getting into the details of the private side of that, but at a high level, you are very much a technical, you're a techie. I work in the techie space, but my primary role, I guess, is designing user experiences. And I think what it comes down to is that I'm not as interested in the tech. I'm terrible for, clicking all the plus buttons when I'm specking out a new laptop with Apple or whatever, but I'm not looking at it subjectively. I'm usually like, yeah, I'll have the bigger hard drive. Yeah, I'll have more RAM. But not because I'm like desperate to have a certain number. But I think ultimately I am comfortable with being in that kind of locked ecosystem. The payoff for me is the improved user experience. So I think we mentioned this when I went back into the Apple ecosystem for my MacBook, running the MacBook alongside the iPad Pro, and I can never remember what the name of the tool is. You're going to remind me again, I'm sure, in a minute. But when these two devices are just in proximity with each other and it knows that they're mine, I can use the two together. Is it Sidecar?
Sidecar, yeah. That's
Sidecar. So, for those who don't know what Sidecar is, if you've got your iPad and you've got your MacBook, and they've got to be of a certain age, so it doesn't work with all of them. But if you've got the more recent devices, you can literally take your mouse cursor from one display immediately to the other hardware seamlessly by simply pushing against the edge of the screen, and it pops the mouse cursor to the other device. You can then copy and paste things backwards and forwards. They become two harmonious pieces of hardware that run as one. That sort of thing, I know you can do that on PCs. You can get tools that allow you to run multiple machines together and all that stuff, but it requires setup. It requires configuration. It's not seamless. And for Joe Public, and people that don't have the time or the inclination anymore to invest in that kind of config, they don't have to worry about it. It just works.
Yeah.
And I'll give you another example of where I think this is really beneficial. And I find this genuinely a hard thing to pivot from audio. So my headphones, I've got the AirPods Pro, and I recently bought the AirPods Pro Max or whatever they're called.
Yeah.
The fact that once those are connected to one of my Apple devices, they seamlessly appear and work on all of the other ones without me having to resync them or, reconnect them by Bluetooth to a different piece of hardware. They just know.
Yeah.
And I can choose them on any device and use the same pair of headphones to answer a phone call, to listen to music on the iPad, to watch a video on my MacBook. It just works.
Yeah.
So again, I think there's that kind of, am I losing out in other areas? Almost certainly.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm paying more for a start, and I don't have the flexibility that might come with other ecosystems. But what I get is a really well designed user experience for the most part that just works.
Yeah.
And it's frictionless. And I think that for me, as someone who is short of time poor for sure, and as someone whose personal life is all about efficiency and working life, is all about efficiency and kind of process design and user experience, that for me is why I think I'm so drawn to it. I can absolutely see the benefits and the virtues of the other ecosystems, but for my personal use case, it doesn't really work.
That completely makes sense, and actually, it reminds me of the PC gaming versus console gaming debate as well. Because I'm a PC
I'm lazy
gamer,
basically.
you're a console gamer.
You're discovering, Robbie. It's sheer laziness on my part. I just want things to work.
Well, it's fair enough, because I think that's the theme for Apple, is that the tagline should be "It just works," right? Because it's it does work out the box easily. You can get a bit more complicated if you want to, but not. I mean, there's not endless amount of flexibility and customization that you can get on Android per se. But there's things that you can do to make it your own on the Apple side of things that have been more developed over time. But that's the thing, is that it just works, and this is why it's hard not to recommend an Apple phone to someone who wants a reliable phone that's going to last a long time. So, for example, my wife's grandma is in her 90s, 92, and she's got an iPhone, so she's able to work. She's able to work an iPhone, and it's not even an up-to-date iPhone. It's I think it's probably an iPhone 7 or something. So an iPhone 7 is now really quite old. What would that be? Like, I don't know, at least 6 years old, I'd say.
Yeah, it's got to be.
About 6 years old. And it's still running absolutely fine, which is another thing for longevity. So for people who want something that just works and is easy to use, user-friendly, Apple is the way forward, I think, for those types of people. But as you rightly pointed out, I am a bit of a I like to get into the weeds. I like to work hard to get things to work for me. So I like to customize things, or at least I did. I'm a serial tinkerer, which is why I really enjoyed Android, because it's endless customization that you can do. But one of the main reasons I've moved to Apple now is because as I've grown older, my time has become less and less available. So I don't have enough time to sit down and properly customize the devices that I'm using. And I'm leaning more to the it just works kind of mentality. Whether that changes over time, and I might flip-flop back, you never know. But that's the main reasons why I've gone to Apple now, is that it does just work. And a lot of the customizations that I might want from any of the Android devices, there's at least some of that available in Apple now, which is enough for me.
Can I give you my controversial statement?
Go on. Plenty of them. I love it.
So I'm with you. I think I echo what you said there. Look, back in the day, I absolutely loved to tinker with my PC. I was probably a bit too old already by the time the phones came around to be bothered. But back in the day, in my youth, I would spend hours messing around trying to make things work on a PC that weren't supposed to work, or were kind of required me to mess around with system files and mess around in the BIOS, or install sort of side loading tools to get disk images to run instead of having the real CD. And honestly, most of that ended up being to do with piracy, to be honest. So my controversial statement for you is, I think that most people some people, when they're drawn to an Android device, are drawn to it because it gives them the freedom to do things that they're not supposed to do with that device. Or
define not supposed to do.
Potentially copyright breaking, illegal activity. In some instances, hear me out. So often what I hear a lot of people talk about when it comes to their Android devices is, I've got this Game Boy emulator and I can play all the Game Boy games that ever existed on my iPhone. It's brilliant. Fine, but that's illegal, technically speaking. I'm not going to.
You can get them on iPhone. They're not illegal.
The loading of the ROMs is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well,
exactly. Depends.
So
Depends. Because you can get the ROMs legally. You can get the ROMs legally. There are ways to do it. You can buy them, like
from
actually
Nintendo?
Licensed. Yeah. Well, Nintendo's a bit different. Nintendo's a bit different. But if it was like Sony or...
Likewise, one of the things that used to be really popular, and an argument for not having an Apple TV, instead buying like a Roku box, was I can install this thing and I get free cable. Or I can stream my downloaded movie library from my central PC. So, I'm just giving you genuine use case. A lot of people, when it comes to these devices, like the idea of making it do something that it's not supposed to do, and the freedom that comes with doing that. So there's my controversial statement for you. And the reason why I think you're perhaps a little less interested in it now, maybe, let me offer you this idea. One is because you're time poor, but also you're better off than you used to be. And perhaps, when was the last time, maybe don't be completely honest. So the answer is, when was the last time you downloaded a movie illegally?
I'd rather not answer. Thank you, Jay.
So I can tell you the last time I downloaded
because I think Samsung
was probably 10 to 15 years ago. And it's not because I don't know how to do it anymore. It's because I haven't got the time to mess around with all the different, mess around trying to get it to work. And I don't need to. And that's not a flex. That is just the reality of being older. I don't have the time to watch all the films I'd like to watch. And when I do come to watch them, I've probably got the streaming service that it's on, or I'll just wait till it comes to DVD and I'll buy it then, or get it cheap when it's on, one of the streaming services and pay for it. So I guess my point is, I think for me personally, at least, my interest in the tinkering stopped when I didn't really need to anymore, and when I didn't have the time to do it anymore, when the frustration and the time wasn't there. So like gaming, again, I'll be very honest and say, back in the day, years and years and years ago, in the days of LimeWire and other tools, I would download games and I would happily run those disk images in a virtual CD drive and play my games that way, because I couldn't afford to buy them as a teenager or as a child, whatever it was. I couldn't afford to buy them outright. Now, I think that gaming, movies, music, it's all so much more accessible at a relatively affordable price.
Yeah.
Maybe games a little bit less so, but things like Game Pass are making it so. If you think about music, like one of the biggest use cases for tinkering, if you want to call it that, it was the days of Napster, when I would download albums and music, but now I don't need to. I just pay a small subscription fee and I get every bit of music that's ever been created pretty much, in my chosen music streaming service. Movies and TV has gone in a very similar direction. So I don't know. I just wonder whether they're one of the bigger arguments for Android over iOS is the fact that you can mess around. And my question would be, well, why would you want to mess around? So that's me giving you my controversial argument for you to counter.
I think it's hard to argue that most.
I didn't say most. I corrected that. I corrected myself. I didn't mean most.
Okay.
One strong argument for, not most.
Well, certainly some Android users will have that. I think it's probably not as large as you think it is, in terms of proportion. But what I would say is that the customization goes beyond just changing the background or changing a font or adding specific widgets and things like that. What I think that the attraction is for Android is that I mentioned before about having a completely reskinned launcher, or even, some people download Linux and stuff on there. So it's not, I wouldn't tie it anywhere between, there's a massive leap between customization and illegal content.
Criminals, Robbie, is what I'm saying. I'm joking. If anyone says anything in the comments. I agree with you, but I do think that, and also that there's probably a really split audience in the Android user base, because I don't think that every Android user buys an Android because they want to tinker.
True. I think it's cheaper.
And there's a whole load of people that just buy them because they like them.
Yeah.
And the flip phone is a really good example. No one's buying that specifically to, it'd be a great place to put Game Boy Advance games. Looks just like an SP. But, I think that people are buying those because Samsung have turned it into a fashionable brand.
Yes.
But in the early days where they weren't quite as fashionable and the hardware didn't look quite as nice as Apple. Certainly my IT colleagues in the past were buying them to tinker. And their argument was, I can do what I like with this, and I can do this, and I can sideload that, and I can add this app, and it lets me stream my private movie collection from home via my NAS. And I'm like, okay.
I think that's more of an argument against the potentially perceived over-controlling of Apple on their devices.
The walled garden.
Yeah. So even I remember back in the day having an iPhone and finding it really difficult to download and manage files on your phone because the file explorer wasn't a thing. You had to do it via third-party apps that you'd have to download.
What files?
Just, PDFs that I want to download from online and read. Just
PDFs.
anything.
PDFs.
You're so suspicious, Jay.
Because what you really mean is my illegal movie collection.
No, just like Excel files, PDFs. So back in the day, all that stuff was like impossible to actually download and manage files.
No, that's true. File management as we know it doesn't work well on.
Yeah.
And even doesn't work well now that well, arguably.
Yeah, and with Android, it's much more like a Windows operating system in that you can find the folders where applications are installed. You can find the root files if you really wanted to tinker in there, or add customizations and stuff. You can create folders and organize it like you would on your desktop on a PC and manage files that way. It just as an example, over time that's become possible on iPhone, but there is an awful lot that iOS doesn't let you do because they haven't let you do it. And it's things like, so I think it's more of you have full control over the technology that you have is more the attraction rather than you get what you're given, and it's kind of.
But this comes back to that
you can't get
point
very
you
deep.
made. Yeah, but it comes back to that point you made about Apple just working.
Yeah,
because that's the reason why they restrict you as heavily as they do is because it prevents you from accidentally messing around with something, or intentionally.
Yeah.
But more often accidentally messing with something you shouldn't have, and that also works true for the Mac itself, Mac OS.
Yeah.
I found that very strange when I first went from Windows to Mac, because on Windows, if I wanted to go and find the executable for a particular application, I could dig through the folders and I'd find it, and I could mess with it, and I could delete all the little files and folders that sat around it, and I could completely screw the app up that I was trying to mess around with. But to your point, I could also completely modify it. Whereas when I got my MacBook, I was thinking, I was when I first started using it, I was like, oh, where's the app? How do I find the app? And actually, the executable, the files set behind it, they're all neatly wrapped in a package that you can't get access to very easily. You have to go through a number of steps to sort of break in, if you like, but it keeps everything almost containerized. So your files are treated very similarly to a Windows machine, but your applications remain in these little bubbles.
Yeah.
And it stops the app from causing problems with the operating system. But
That's
it
the thing. I
also-
think that's the conclusion. To draw a line under that, I think that Android is the tinkerer's tool. It's the one that wants to really get under the hood of applications in the files, and Apple is, it just works, right?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think I think I transitioned over time from someone who wanted to tinker to
Yeah.
someone who just wanted it to work.
Yeah.
Because my interests changed, my use case for my machines changed, and I don't think it will change back. I've enjoyed having a PC again, but I'll be honest, there's certain times where I think, right, to make this thing do the thing I want it to do, I've got to spend about an hour now reading forums, downloading weird files, installing
I love
things and
that
changing
stuff.
things, and I think,
I
I
love
just
that
can't be
stuff.
bothered, and I don't bother. I miss that a little bit. I genuinely do miss that a little bit, but I just don't have the time. And I, like you said, well, now, if I've got an hour or two to myself and I want to come down and do some photo editing or record a video or do something on Photoshop or whatever, I just need it to work. I just need to open it up and go straight in, and not have things thrown at me about prompts or updates or this driver's failed or whatever.
There's one thing that's worth shouting out, and I know you included this in the notes, is that one of the biggest criticisms of Apple is that their App Store is the only way to get applications on iPhones. So they have complete control over the apps that are able to be downloaded on iPhones. And that has its pros and cons as well. All the apples on iPhones tend to be better quality, better vetted, less risk of viruses or any malware or anything that could cause risk on your devices. But the other flip side is that from the manufacturer's point of view, there's a 30% cut that needs to be paid to actually deliver the app to the device, and that's actually come under a lot of heat from various governments, including the EU, has criticised them, and I think have fined them for not allowing them to other manufacturers to have their apps on the devices without going through the Apple Store. So you mentioned in your notes that Apple's sideloading is going to be coming soon, so that you can download and install apps outside.
I would say rumoured for iOS 17, but not confirmed.
Yeah, I guess it's not.
I wonder whether Apple will make much of a fuss about that, or whether they'll try and spin it in a marketing way, because iOS 17, I guess, is due to be announced in a couple of months.
Yeah.
We're expecting WWDC in June.
Yeah.
Which is the developer conference. That's when they always announce the new tool, and it gets released in beta to developers, and then we see it on our devices usually around September, October, when the new phone launches. So that's kind of the window, I guess, we're working to. How will Apple pitch it if it is indeed included in iOS 17? Will it just be kind of buried because they don't want to talk about it, or will they try and work up some sort of marketing spin? Will Fortnite, for example, could we possibly see Apple and Epic collaborate on launching this side loading by announcing the Fortnite or the Epic Store? I mean, it'd be.
Are they not still in litigation at the moment, or
I don't know. Well, that is part of the reason for this, isn't it? That litigation is part of the reason why this is happening, because Fortnite or Epic specifically took Apple to court over their fees, and because they were trying to get around Apple's App Store. Apple blocked Fortnite from the App Store, so for a number of years now, you haven't been able to play one of the world's biggest games on one of the world's biggest mobile platforms.
I reckon there's still enough bad blood there for them not to share a stage on WWDC.
Probably. but then how are they gonna talk about it? And also, to what degree will they allow side loading? I'm sure it'll come with heavy restrictions, because they do it for a reason. Like you said, I know there's the 30% cut, and everyone thinks it's purely about the money, but it's not. It is as much to do with the security of the platform and the security of its customers, because one fair criticism aimed at Android is that there are some incredibly shonky third-party apps in that app store with very questionable credentials from the developers and possibly undertaking some very shady acts. So the Android ecosystem and the app store around it is riddled with horrible apps that are not governed in any meaningful way.
Yeah,
is Apple really going to want to fully open themselves up to that? I wonder whether, if you do choose to sideload, whether you have to sign some sort of virtual agreement.
They'll
that
throw a bunch of warnings at you for sure.
Well, yeah, but imagine what's Apple's obligation if you sideload something onto your app that then fundamentally bricks your phone? Would they still be obliged to give you the same level of Apple care that you might otherwise get through the Genius Bar, etc.? That if you are if you've broken your phone through, doing that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wonder whether or not you waive some of your support rights, or I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see how they handle that, because, as we mentioned earlier, the way that they support their customers is one of the big reasons why they charge you the premium. But
yeah,
if you're going to go out of your way to ruin your phone, I mean,
it does open a bit of can of worms, doesn't it? Because it could be they now need to scan for viruses in case you've picked up a third-party virus from a different store or something like that. And I don't think we properly defined sideloading for those listening. Sideloading is you can download and install apps from a completely different source. So it could be from a website, it could be from a different app store, but it means that Apple would have no control over those apps that go through, or maybe they would have some control by the fact of having that running the software on the phone. There may be some blacklisted apps, no matter where they come from, that they're able to stop and things like that.
I was just thinking as you've described that, actually, because really what we're talking about is exactly what you can do on a MacBook. You can download third-party apps from anywhere other than the App Store. But increasingly over the years, as they've iterated on Mac OS, and Windows does this to a degree now as well, the amount of prompts and things you have to agree to or accept, or the conditions that you're having to acknowledge before it'll let you install that third-party tool are significant, and they keep growing. And now, in fact, it's harder on the Mac. You'll often install an app and it'll say, "Oh, do you want to do this? This has been downloaded from the internet. Are you sure?" You say yes. You install it, and then once you try to run the app, it will go, "Oh, this app is trying to access your microphone. This app's trying to access your camera," like it does on iPhone. I wonder whether iPhone will just end up doing something like that, where it'll say, "You've downloaded this from a third party. Here's a bit of a disclaimer. Are you sure you want to go ahead?" Yeah, go on then.
Yeah, because the other point is that because Apple create the iOS, the system that runs the phone, all of the apps have to be coded in a specific language to be able to run on the phone in the first place. So at the code level, they might be able to vet apps and make it so that apps can't actually be compiled through what's it called, the Xcode on the on Mac computers, unless it's past a certain threshold of security. There's definitely ways they'll be able to make it more secure, and because they also own and run the language that you need to use to create iOS apps, there's probably something around there that they can do to make sure that that the app hasn't been tinkered with since it was compiled in Xcode, for example, and signing them with certificates and stuff like that.
It's a debate that we could probably go on for hours on. And in the interest of creating a podcast anyone will listen to, we're probably going to need to draw it to a close shortly. But
sure,
yeah, it's really interesting, and I think your summary is a good one. I think, in fact, I'm going to let you wrap it up, Robbie. I was about to read your notes, which is really impolite because you wrote them.
No,
so
that's fine.
You draw this to a close, because I think it's been a really interesting debate that we'll probably need to carry on with.
Yeah. I'm just going to add one to my so the summary, the different columns we've got is pros of both. So I'm not going to focus on the cons. I think for the summary we're just going to focus on the pros, and I'm just going to add one to the Android side. Illegal activity is a pro of
all Android customers are criminals.
Able to do illegal activity on Android devices. There you go. There's a pro for you.
Okay, I feel like I'm going to suffer for that comment, but it was a joke. I should point out it was a joke. Before the internet goes mad.
Hey, I'll let the audience decide. So, Apple pros, we've got the simplicity and efficiency. I think that's a big thing because the hardware works so seamlessly with the software. The battle over RAM was a big thing for years, about how for a very long time Apple didn't actually release the stats of their hardware. You didn't know the milliamps of their batteries, you didn't know what size RAM that they had, and the reason was because it was far lower than their counterparts in the Android space. But the reason they were able to do that and still be way more efficient is because of how efficiently their hardware and the software works together. So there was always the numbers
I feel like you're not doing these Apple pros a service here, because you've bashed Apple in your pro, and I noticed the second point you're about to read out also includes a negative about Apple. I don't think you're being very fair here, Robbie.
No. So you're happy to take the pros if you want, but I was saying that as a pro because Apple efficiency means that they don't need to compete in the numbers game of I've got more RAM than whatever.
Well, like a backhanded compliment, I'll be honest. Apple's hardware was often shitter than everybody else's, but because of the way they run their hardware, their software.
Well, all I'm saying is it's more than just the numbers. It's their efficiency and simplicity.
Yeah.
So the second point is the ecosystem, which is, it's the warm embrace of Apple. It works with all their other devices. So if you have other Apple devices, it's going to work really well together. And I think out of the...
Don't add the second bit.
I wasn't. After... if you look at any of the other ecosystems, Samsung have started to develop their own as well, and Google have got a bit of their own. So like the watches and the buds, the earphones, Apple is just way more mature and arguably way better at it because they're UI experts. So they make everything simple and as easy as possible. So there's the pro for the Apple. And then the last one, which I think is the main reason I moved over, is the reliability and the longevity. So I know many people who struggle with Android devices for longer than a couple of years, sometimes even less, depending which manufacturer you get it from. So the fact that you can have Apple devices that are 5+ years and still running really well is a big plus for Apple.
Yeah, and often the only exception to the running really well comment is the battery life, which we know is because of that's battery tech. That's a problem for everyone. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I'm on the 12 Pro at the moment, which I appreciate is not that old, but I'm running. It's 2 years old now. I'm probably going to upgrade this year.
Yeah,
I don't need to. I could probably run it, as you said, for several years. I'm going to upgrade because I'm a techie.
Yeah,
but yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I was blown away how long my MacBooks were running for. My previous MacBook would have gone on and on and on.
Loads of great stories about MacBooks and their longevity as well. My wife's got a MacBook that's well over 10 years old, and it's still running relatively fine, although it suffers a bit now when opening a browser, just because browsers suck up a lot more RAM these days than they used to.
Interestingly, the thing and I think that Apple's almost sort of boxed themselves into a corner with that, because they've made a problem for themselves in that because they do work as well as they do for as long as they do, people are less inclined to upgrade to them.
True.
And I will say, and this is an anti-Apple comment, so brace yourself, here it comes.
My God.
I don't like the fact that sometimes it feels like certain capabilities are locked from early devices that I feel like probably could have done the thing that almost like software locked prevented, even though it feels like that device should absolutely have been able to do it. I'll give you an example. And this might be hardware based, so again, I'm happy to take corrections in the chat. iPad Pro, whatever I've got now, Pro 2, marked, I don't know what it is. It's one before the current one. The current one has the Apple Pencil, and the current iPad has that you've got the interaction where if the pencil gets close to the screen, it creates an interaction before it physically touches the screen.
Like a hover feature, yeah.
I find it hard to believe that couldn't work on my iPad, which is the version before. What have they built into the hardware that has fundamentally allowed that to happen? That means that my Apple Pencil, which is still the current Apple Pencil, and my iPad, which is the latest version of the iPad prior to the one that's out now, can't do that. And it's those. I think sometimes they
need
lock
a reason
things
to upgrade.
Out. Yeah, well, it's things like I remember back on the MacBooks, I had a fairly decent MacBook Pro. It was a few years old, but not massively so. And there was some functionality between your MacBook and your iPad that they announced way back when that didn't work on my MacBook because my MacBook was too old. I was like, why is my MacBook too old to run that?
Yeah, even though it might be on the same OS
changed. Yeah, and nothing had fundamentally changed in the hardware other than advances in RAM and stuff. But nothing had changed at a software level. And as far as I could tell, this was a software-driven activity between the two devices, and yet I wasn't allowed to utilize it because my MacBook was deemed to be too old. Now that could be for multiple reasons, performance, etc. But sometimes it just feels like it's locked away. And it's similar with the iPhones. I think the 13 had almost the same cameras and everything as the 12, yet the soft focus, the faked soft focus,
cinema
which
mode
they use in portrait mode, was only available in still images on the 12, but it was available in video on the 13. Why? Now, again, maybe there was some sort of hardware difference. I'm not an expert, but that was one of those things where you thought, well, these devices look and feel almost identical, yet you've got functionality here that I don't have that feels like it's software. Like it's software, surely, that is anticipating that. I don't know. Anyway, so
it's right to be skeptical.
My one Apple gripe. Sometimes it feels like they artificially create a reason to upgrade rather than because their devices do seem to go on for as long as they do.
It's right to be skeptical of that stuff because I think in some instances it has been proven that they've done it on purpose, and where it's to encourage people to upgrade. One of the extreme examples of this, and not to pile on Apple on this stuff, but it was found out in the news that they were purposely making battery lives worse on older phones to encourage people to upgrade at some point, and I'll have to find the article to back that up before I get called out in the comments for talking shit.
I don't think it was making battery life worse. I thought the argument was that they were reducing the performance of the device.
Oh, making it slower. That might be right.
Their argument, which was them,
was to make the battery life better. Yes,
was because they were trying to help those devices with poorer battery life.
That's right.
But
yes.
again,
mixing up my news.
No one's perfect. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Apple are all
no,
angels. I know. I'm sure there's some sort of sinister angle there, but yeah,
part of it is
they got called out.
You rightly said it. They've backed themselves into the corner. It's the same with the phones. They still release a phone every year, even though most years it's like an iterative upgrade. It's very minor things that have changed. So the only things that they can do quite often is add something new in the software features that isn't available for previous versions. So you do see that quite a lot, and it's partly because they have this unbelievable pressure to release something new every year, even though it might not be necessary. What they release that year might be a very, very minor upgrade. And I think the iPad is a perfect example. Hardware wise, it was almost exactly the same as the year before. I think that feature, the hover feature with the pencil, was one of the main highlights of the new version, other than the fact obviously that had the M2 chip instead of the M1, which the whole other debate about it not making use of that much power anyway. But
well, I was going to say I got the top end of the previous generation, and from what I can tell from my own experience and from what I read online, they're not pushing that anywhere near its capabilities. And yet, like you said,
in a few years'
time it'll be redundant. There'll be a new version replacing it.
WWDC. I'm looking forward to that because I'm really hoping this year they're going to be like more desktop level apps, powerful apps that are going to be available for.
Hold your breath. Maybe.
Yeah.
Also, there was the rumor, which is now suggested that the newest rumor is that the AR VR headset that they are surely going to announce at some point, because it's been rumored for so long now. But the rumor was that it was due for announcement at WWDC, that they're potentially putting that on ice temporarily due to kind of the economics at the moment around the globe and
the interest in
living
AR
crisis and also the
downhill.
sort of lack of interest in the metaverse right now while everyone's focusing on AI. So it'd be interesting to see whether that headset gets parked now for a little while, because the rumor was, those who haven't seen it, it would have come with a premium price tag of circa $3,000 was the rumor. Again, all rumor. But,
yeah. I mean, arguably, the HoloLens came out at that price, I think, when it first announced anyway. So it aimed probably more at professionals is what they're aiming for. But anyway, so that's the Apple side. We've talked about pros and cons. Look at that. So the Android side, in the summary, we've got just the pure choice of devices. And one thing I was going to mention earlier, you mentioned the different hardware and form factors. Have you seen the rise of gaming phones and the various different hardware options you can get for gaming phones in the Android space as well?
Not paid too much attention to it. I've seen bits and pieces. Hasn't it? Razer have got something.
I think Razer had one back in the day. There's one called Red Magic, which is a company that's specifically aimed at gaming phones. But Asus have frequently brought out new gaming phones. They brought out one recently, in fact, that looks ridiculous. It's got like ridiculous in a good way if you're into gaming hardware, in that it's got like a vapor chamber inside, which is like a really fancy way of cooling it down. You can get attachments on the back that have like a fan to cool it down even further. It has 2 USB-C ports, so you can charge it at either the horizontal or the vertical angle. It's 165 hertz refresh rate screen.
It's such a PC gamer device.
So
not me.
It's got these haptic triggers on horizontal mode, so you can have trigger buttons on the top. They're not cookie, but they're like haptic, so you just touch them and they feel like so like, say if you're playing like a shooting game on your phone. So anyway, the point is,
more importantly though, have you seen, if we're talking about reskinned Android devices, have you seen the Coca-Cola Android phone? I mean, that's a prime example of why, of all the benefits you've been alluding to, you can have a phone with Coca-Cola slapped all over the back and then all over your icons. No?
Yeah. I mean, if you're really into Coca-Cola, maybe that's the one
joking.
for you. But
no one wants that. No one wants that device.
There will be someone.
Why?
There will be someone who wants that.
Yeah.
But also super like free advertising for Coca-Cola. Anyway.
What a weird brand to align with your mobile phone choice.
I know.
So weird.
I know. But yes, flexibility, good or bad, there is flexibility and choice. Sorry, in the amount of devices that are available with Android. More, I think, on the budget side of things. That's why people look to Android, because it's an open source software. It doesn't cost much at all to develop or take from Google to install on whatever device you're manufacturing. So that's how you can have devices that are, sub £200 running Android and working generally fine. So I think that the choice is more supposed to be on like the budget side, as well as the different form factors that are available as well. The other pro, I think, is the software flexibility. So you really can get down in the weeds in terms of the different apps. You can configure things how you like it. You can have completely different launchers, so it looks and feels like a completely different phone. You can also, if you really want to, get down to the nitty-gritty of the OS and load something completely different on it, like Linux, as I mentioned earlier. I've seen a few videos online of people doing that. That is highlighting obviously the use case, and the people who are going to be using it is more the tinkerer side of things. I think those out of the users of these systems, it's the tinkerers and those who are looking for budget phones, so smartphones that relatively usable and have relative longevity, simple to use but quite cheap, say the sub 200. That's the one user, and then the other is the tinkerers, the flexibility users.
We need, as a follow-up podcast, because we can't talk about it now, we need another conversation around the space or lack thereof for other non-Android or Apple providers, because I have one device I have experienced was the old Windows phone back in the day. So I'd love to get into the weeds on other mobile providers that aren't Apple or Android. Maybe that's a future podcast.
I don't think there are any anymore, but yeah, we'll keep it open for a future topic.
Well, Nokia are still going.
I think they use an Android.
Are they?
Yeah.
But even on their old school ones?
Not their old school ones.
No. If you haven't browsed their website recently, you can buy devices that look identical to a Nokia 3210 or those sort of brick phones you remember, with that kind of level of functionality. Very, very simple phones. They do the clamshell, they do the Nokia 3210. I only know this because someone at work was asking about it, and I Googled it, and I was blown away by the amount of choice for sort of super cheap mobile phones that Nokia do that still look and feel like the old school ones. So they're still going.
Jay. It might be your next phone. It just works.
It just works, yeah. Well, I do like technology, Robbie. Let's not pretend otherwise. But yeah, okay, maybe when I'm a little older. I'm not quite there yet for a Nokia 3210, but you can't beat Snake. I still argue it's one of the best mobile games ever made.
True, it is a fantastic game.
Pokemon Go.
Yeah, true. Cool. Well, that has been fun to chat about that. I think we'll leave that one there, but there's still quite a lot we can chat about, so maybe we'll revisit this again. Probably some interesting developments that come out of WWDC, the Apple conference about the software as well, so we can touch on them at the time. But that's all for this episode. Thank you for hanging out with us, and don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and all good podcasting services so you don't miss an episode. You can also check us out on Twitch at JNRobbie, where we stream 3 times a week, doing a variety of games. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Don't forget, all Android users are criminals. Goodbye.
Hot take from Jay again. See you next time.